The weather looks pretty awesome today. It's been a while when there's mostly been just blue skies and sunlight. And what did I read today? How about this one? A lot of people often fear recreational people attaching things to their drones, but usually it's officials in terms of the news, I guess, using them in a quote weaponized way anyways. This one says, police fire tear gas from drones at Indian farmers' protests. There has been actually a lot more farmers around the world protesting against government regulations and all that. This one says, Indian police on Tuesday used tear gas and detained some farmers who clashed with them and tried to break barricades, blocking their way to New Delhi to demand guaranteed crop prices. Police dropped tear gas canisters on the protesting farmers from a drone at one of the border points in northern Haryana state that leads to New Delhi, where tens of thousands of farmers are headed on tractors and trucks. The demonstration is an echo of protests in 2021, which saw farmers camping out on the city's outskirts for more than a year. The government has banned large gatherings in the capital and suspended internet service in some districts of neighboring Haryana state to prevent communication among the protesters. Now, that's a common thing I guess a lot of governments are doing too, cutting access to information and, I guess in this case, internet. The demonstration comes more than 2 years after Prime Minister Narendra Modi withdrew controversial agricultural laws that had triggered the earlier protests. The farmers who began their march in northern Haryana and Punjab states are asking for a guaranteed minimum support price for all farm produce. Kind of makes you think too, because, for example, when it comes to things like protests and stuff, it's really useful to use things like a drone just to capture the situation, document it to see what's going on. But can you imagine, like here, for example, you have authority figures using drones as a weapon, I guess you could say, to control the situation in their view. And the regulations in that way will say, oh, we're flying a drone, so we're gonna make it a no-flight zone now for everyone else, and you can't document the situation. So would you agree that's the way to go? Because again, when it comes to things like regulations and stuff like that, I think it should be fair overall. If people aren't posing any danger like there, I think they should be able to document the situation, correct? Whereas in these cases, you could use it as a technicality. Hey, it's a law, we ban everything, so you can't do that. It's just as scary in my opinion, like there, where they can cut off internet communication because they don't want people, I guess, talking about an issue per se. Now for here anyways, people often say one of the reasons why there's things like over-the-top drone regulations or fear-mongering is from, quote, I guess, certain groups of people who don't want things like a drone to take over what they usually use. Whereas in this case, it's things like helicopters, and it seems like in some places that's exactly what's happening anyways. It says drones will replace helicopter program that Army developed at $2 billion costs. The US Army is giving up on a Scout helicopter development program after spending $2 billion on it, opting instead to pursue more affordable drone alternatives. The decision on the Future Attack and Reconnaissance Aircraft program was prompted by a sober assessment of the modern battlefield, according to an Army statement Thursday. We are learning from the battlefield, especially in Ukraine, that aerial reconnaissance has fundamentally changed, Army Chief of Staff General Randy George said in the statement. The Army is turning its attention to unmanned aircraft, which have proved to be effective on the battlefield in Ukraine and can be developed more cheaply. Sensors and weapons mounted on a variety of unmanned systems and in space are more ubiquitous, further reaching and more inexpensive than ever before. The Army will accelerate procurement and fielding of such systems, including the Future Tactical Unmanned Aircraft System, launched effects, and small commercial drones, George said. The service will also continue to fund the manned future long-range assault aircraft, which would eventually succeed the UH-60 Black Hawk. It makes you think too, where if you were to agree with that point, where it's lobby groups of, let's just say, traditional manned aviation wanting to restrict things like drones, what happens in the end ultimately? An average individual, for example, they can't fly the thing anymore, it's so commercialized, and at the same time, they're still going to get, I guess, kicked out in this space because, like here, they just think it's a cheaper and more productive route to go with, And this was fascinating as this topic was trending, where apparently in the city of Richmond, there was a proposal to make a safe injection site of sorts. It's kind of like how they propose in other areas like here, where if you give people who are addicted to drugs safe places to take them, then I suppose it's supposed to save lives, but that hasn't really turned out to be the case from what I've seen and read anyways. So they were proposing to put that in this city here, and apparently a lot of people started to protest it. Like here it says, total, absolute, abject chaos at Richmond City Hall tonight. RCMP called to a public meeting over a proposed safe consumption site. So it was kind of interesting just hearing people's comments, and even I guess the mayor telling people to stop, I guess, protesting in that way, because you have to do this in a formal process. But the most interesting thing I thought anyways, when it comes to these subjects, like for a person like myself, I usually just hear what the news says. They say, oh, they look at the data and all that, and it should work. But here, there was actually one remark from a person who was apparently, I guess, a recovering drug addict, and he kind of makes the point where just giving them drugs and more drugs per se doesn't really help them. So he's actually against it. It's kind of a fascinating perspective, I thought. Like it says here in my speech at the Richmond City Council opposing the motion for a supervised consumption site, so you can see it here.
Having personally battled addiction, I intimately understand the complexities and challenges associated with substance abuse. For years, I grappled with addiction, spending exorbitant sums on drugs and navigating the relentless cycle of dependence. In my darkest moments, the concept of a supervised consumption site would have had little impact on my daily struggles. Moreover, the idea of locating such a facility within a hospital precinct raises significant concerns, particularly when the motion fails to clearly define its location and implications. Let us take the time to listen to the voices of those who have entrusted you with their representation and collaborate with Vancouver Coastal Health to conduct a thorough analysis that encompasses the insights and ideas of our citizens. And to finish, here's what I experienced from Richmond Addiction Services. When I finally asked for help, my mom took me to Richmond Addiction Services. We had a 5-minute chat about my drug use. And then they said, because there is a couple-month wait for a public-funded bed for rehab, we are going to prescribe methadone to you. I said, no, I do not want to replace one drug for another. I want to get off drugs completely, and was told this was my only option. We left that place with no hope, and my parents, fearing for the worst, reopened their mortgage and spent over $60,000 on private rehab for a 9-month program. These services you all speak of being readily available, are only making pharmaceutical companies richer and have no impact or help to people that can't afford treatment and rely on the government. I realize this is a provincial issue, but why were you able to write the province to install more red light cameras and not write a letter to SORT, a wraparound program that treats the entire problem? Thank you.
So what would you think overall? I think in general for myself anyways, just based on, again, the things I read, it didn't sound like this stuff was very successful. And that is true too, with the notion of giving people more drugs to solve a problem. I mean, even just for regular health, I always find it interesting where the solutions always take this drug, take another drug for it. I've often heard the saying too, which I think it's accurate. If you're like a doctor, for example, a good doctor's goal should be to try to get you to recover, to get you off drugs, for example. Like that should be the last resort in some ways, in terms of trying to heal someone in the overall picture, kind of like here, I would say. You want to try to find solutions to get people off those drugs, as opposed to just giving them more drugs where they'll be addicted to something else afterwards. right, see you guys later.